Do you sometimes wonder how you could truly have an impact when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How do you know you are moving in the right direction when it comes to becoming a more inclusive individual? As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod brings topics such as ethnicity, genders, sexuality, religion on the table. We talk about research and science, but also emotions, feelings, and vulnerability. We discuss allyship, advocacy, privilege, but most importantly, we talk action. Because without action, we stay still. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, stillness is never the answer. Welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. In this week's episode, I have the pleasure to welcome Jacki Edry. Jacki recently published her first book, Moving Forward, Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery and Faith, and launched a blog on her website, jackisbooks.com, which focuses on education, inclusion, neurodiversity, and more. Jacki is a graduate of Hampshire College with an extensive background in education, writing, and marketing. She has been exploring the world of autism and neurodiversity for over 35 years. As a professional, as a parent of neurodivergent children, and firsthand as a survivor of complex brain surgery that affected her neurological and perceptual abilities. She has spent many years advocating for inclusion programs in the educational system, providing support for families of children with disabilities, and advocating for the inclusion of people with disabilities in society. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Jacki for this episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Welcome to another episode of As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Today I have the great pleasure to welcome Jacki as a guest. Jacki, welcome to As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Me too, actually. Me too. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think it's going to be a very, very insightful conversation. So many things to share. But I'm going to start, before we dive into the topic and everything, I'm going to start with my my usual question, which is, Jacki, what is your story?
My story is that I'm an author and an educator, a bit of a marketer as well. And I recently launched my first book. It is my first book in a blog. And my book's called Moving Forward, Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith. And basically, it's a compilation of story of my journey that has... I had brain surgery 8 years ago. And after my brain surgery, I became neurodivergent. And what I realized throughout my journey of recovery is that my sensory processing became scrambled, and it reminded me of a lot of the things that I've seen over the years as a parent of a son with autism and other children who are neurodivergent, and working with many neurodivergent people, children and adults over the years. I realized that I was now in the shoes of somebody who has become neurodivergent myself. And I share that journey in my book in order to assist others. So that's a lot about basically what I do and who I am. And my journey also had to do with faith and how that helped along the way, and the meaning of life and all that other sort of stuff that I like to think about.
And all these things we're gonna look into and talk about, I hope, and we'll have the time to cover all these things. But as you said, I think what is interesting is, so you mentioned actually briefly, you started working in the field before having other experiences that came to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Actually, the first time my first experience with autism was when I was in high school. I volunteered in a program. I worked with a young boy who was 5 years old. and he had a home program, a child-centered home program. It was
Mm-hmm.
wonderful, and I just loved him and realized that, you know, that as much as he had communication issues and he was challenging, he was a beautiful soul, and I became very attracted to the whole um, autism and understanding autism. And I had decided to be a vet from the time I was a very young child. Actually, I was sure I was going to be a vet, but sort of my relationship with him was so interesting. And then in college, somebody asked me if I wanted to work at a camp for autistic children, and so I did that, and it was fascinating, and we did incredible things. And so after that experience, I sort of switched gears in the middle of university and wrote a thesis about educating autistic children.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of became my life's work. A number of years later, I had a child, and he was diagnosed with autism.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of one thing led to another, and that's sort of that's the experience we're talking about. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you want.
No, no, no. It's great. But I have a question actually just
Okay.
came to mind. I was thinking, how do you see the difference between these two roles? And I think there is a third one you mentioned as well after your surgery, of being an educator and working with children with autism, and then suddenly you're becoming a mother with the child with autism as well. And how did this experience kind of maybe changed, or I don't know if change is the right word, you'll tell us, but made you grow and evolve in that relationship and that understanding of how to include and how to care for people with autism?
Okay, well, actually, I think I was really, really, really lucky because I had spent years with autistic children, and actually not in a formal educational setting, in the sense
Mm-hmm.
that I didn't learn how to be a teacher for autistic children with theories like ABA and all kinds of other sort of rigid settings. I worked with autistic kids in the youngest, when I worked with a child in high school, was a home setting, and then after that, we were doing wild things in the middle of a forest in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
Upstate New York, we had a nonverbal group of inner city kids from Manhattan, and that had been learning in sort of rigid school settings. But we had them in the summer program. We were doing things like whitewater canoeing and camping, and teaching them, it was all very informal, even though they were non-verbal, and we taught them, and we learned with them how to do incredible things.
Yeah.
And it was all very spontaneous and very natural. And then after that, when I went to do my thesis, ABA was just starting. It was called behavior modification back then, and I realized that it was all very structured and very, rewards and punishments, and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my first instinct about it, which is not going to sound very nice when I say things the way I see them, even if it doesn't sound very nice, I reminded of, I worked with a lot of dogs, and it did remind me of how they train a dog. They would sit them down, do something, and then give them a treat, and that's what they were doing with children. And a lot of them were also very frustrated and aggressive, and I understand why they would react the way they were reacting once my sensory processes scrambled. Mm-hmm. And I realized people forcing me to do things and stop stimming and things like that. If someone tried to do that with me as a child, I would have also become aggressive and frustrated, because it needs to balance out the system.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky, because by the time my son was born, I had very, very firm ideas of how to work with children, autistic children, mm-hmm. or neurodivergent children as a general rule. And that helped me when it's very, like, things like ABA are very, very, very popular. And there's a lot of pressure on the side of this educational system to use those types of strategies to work with kids. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate that I had experience both with and without, and that's what my thesis was about. So the time I had a child, I was able to stand, to sit in front of a committee of 10 professionals who were trying to convince me to do these things with my child, and I would say no, not happening.
Mhm.
This is the way we're working with him. This is what we're going to do, and I think it saved his life and mine that I
Yeah.
had that previous experience. And after my brain surgery, when my sensory processing scrambled, uh, I realized it was like getting the stamp of authorization that what I had thinking all and observing all along was actually on target.
Mhm.
And it confirmed that we shouldn't have gone down the route of eliminating behaviors and all that other stuff, because it was way off base. And the way of working with kids was really to observe and try and understand what they're thinking and feeling and how to make their lives easier.
Mhm.
Try to find any devices, whether it be augmented communication tools, or like I have earlens or earlens spectral filters, which are colored lenses that filter light and enable them to see correctly. So things like that, or earphone sound, help processing sound, or
Mhm.
muffling sound. So to figure out like what each child needs in the sensory area, and as the sensory system becomes more balanced and there's less need to stim and things like that, can't force a child to stop those behaviors because they have a purpose.
Yeah.
And I would find myself rocking because I would feel my vestibular system went off whack, and I would feel as if there were weights pushing me sideways and
Mhm.
things like that. And I would find myself rocking. Actually, my physical therapist taught me to rock. He said, "Hold on, chair, and rock back and forth." And I realized she was teaching me to rock. And I said, "What are you doing?" I started laughing. I said, because if I was autistic and I was a child, they would have told me I was stimming and that I must stop rocking. And here
Mhm.
was my physical therapist who was not trained to work with autistic people. She said, "Of course it balances out the system." So when that sort of stuff started happening, I realized that what I've been doing was on target, and that one mustn't force people with dysregulated sensory input to behave in a specific manner. That's sort of
Mhm.
what I got involved.
And it's interesting you're bringing up as well the educational system, because I hear a lot of things actually, even if we were taking it outside of the context of neuroatypical children. I don't think any of us would enjoy or do enjoy, even though the educational system is like that, to have that kind of rigid system where things are all the same for everyone. So I can imagine when you're sharing this story that, yeah, it makes even less sense
Sure.
for these children that need an attention that is different from one to
Of
another,
course.
even more. And so how would you see the ideal educational system for, I want to say in general, maybe we'll talk specifically about neurotypical children, but how would you see this, yeah, what would be
You
this
know,
ideal educational system?
well, educational systems were developed to prepare children for the workplace many
Mm-hmm.
years ago. That's how the school system sort of developed, and that was during the Industrial Revolution, and everyone needed to learn to read, write, and sort of be identical as if they were on a factory line, and it hasn't changed much since then.
Mm-hmm.
But the world has
Unfortunately,
changed,
yes.
and the skills now that are necessary for the workplace are creativity and
Mm-hmm.
information, like data mining, understanding skills, whether they be
Yep.
social skills or they be cognitive skills, that a person would need in order to understand information, compile information, present information. It's a skill set, um, and confidence, and all of those things, social emotional skills,
Mm-hmm.
are actually in many ways not even not taught. It's not the not taught, they're also discouraged in many ways in typical
Yeah.
educational settings. there's only one right answer to a question on a test. Wait a
Mm-hmm.
minute, child is thinking in a different way, let's say associative thinking, or understands the question differently than what the teacher had intended, they would write something different and they would get wrong answer. But actually problem solving and answering questions and coming up with ideas and theories are all things that require high levels of cognitive thinking and creativity, and it's the things that are actually taught out of you in the existing school system.
Mm-hmm.
You get right answer, wrong answer, be impulsive, raise your hand fast. It's all black and white, and it's everything you don't want to teach a child is what the school system teaches them.
Yep.
Now, if it was revamped, let's say, and they were teaching things like, and there is a movement to do this, by the way. This is not, Jackie saying this is what should happen. There are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people who are very experienced who are leaders in the field who are saying this, but I agree with it, right? But if you use, let's say, project or problem-based learning,
Mm-hmm.
which means you give a child or group of children a problem, you teach them how to work together. That would also solve an issue of inclusiveness, and it would also teach them the skills they're looking for.
Yep.
So in that sense, let's say you have 5 kids in a group and someone overseeing them, not giving them the answers, but teaching them how to talk to each other and solve a problem together, and come up with ideas together. Then the one kid, let's say, writes well, and one kid presents well, one kid speaks well, one kid researches well, one kid, I don't know, photographs well. Everyone has their own skill, and everyone, whether they be a super genius test taker, or they be a photographer, or they be a graphic designer, every one of those skills has equal value and
Mm-hmm.
necessity. So if they were taught to work in groups, even people with attention or neurodivergence or different ways of thinking, every skill would be included and appreciated, and they would work together to form a complete solve a problem, or
Mm-hmm.
build a project, or whatever it would be. Everyone would find their place. So that would also solve the problem of inclusiveness in society.
Yep.
And people who would think that people who are neurodivergent or autistic, whatever, don't really have that much to contribute to society, would actually realize that, wait a minute, this autistic person or this person with ADHD may have a more creative thinking or a particular skill that the average neurotypical doesn't have,
Mm-hmm.
and that skill is worthy, and they can contribute something to society. So it can break down those stigmas as well. So if an educational system was designed to have kids working together and projects and teaching social emotional skills and cognitive skills and giving them the opportunity to experiment and try out different types of learning, in nature or hands-on or in research, doesn't matter what,
Mm-hmm.
applying those concepts and ways of working, that would solve the problem of preparation for the workplace and for diversity as well. So, that's good. That's what I would dream up as the ultimate
That,
school
that
system.
is a very, very interesting, actually, what you're sharing, because I mean, it makes complete sense.
Mhm.
And you're wondering sometimes why it's not done like this, because
I
indeed,
don't know.
as you said, it is about bringing those unique skills that each and every one of us has into the mix and
Mhm.
creating that, and linking back to, I don't know if they've done research around that, but they've clearly done research at an organization level, how inclusion makes teams more performant.
Sure.
I imagine they would probably find very, very similar results at an educational level, where creating that inclusivity and that diversity of minds and bringing all these different skills, these unique skills that each and every one of us has, will probably bring better performance as well to
I'm
each and every
sure.
one of us.
I'm sure. I don't know why it's just people are very stuck in their own ways, and
True.
educational system is this big dinosaur that people have been shouting
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be changed for many years, but it still seems to be pretty much stuck where it was. I mean, there are PBL schools, and there are democratic schools, which are
Mm-hmm.
also interesting, and there are all different kinds of schools. It's important, though, that whatever the school be, that there needs to be structure. And you can't just tell a group of kids work together, which is what happens in a lot of schools now in a regular classroom, where the teacher will say, okay, divide the class into groups, work on a project together. Now, the kids don't have those skills, how to work on a project together. They don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to respect to each other. They don't know how to divide up a task. One kid always seems to do more than the other kids and get frustrated. The other kids aren't doing what they should be doing, and it doesn't work. It's not because the kids have a problem. It's because they're not taught how to work together. So it must be structured and guided. But if these groups are mentored, kids have much. I think before you, kids have much better ideas in many ways than adults, and we sort of teach it out of them, and creativity. So if they were actually leave it to them and tell them how to answer the question, use their skills, and teach them how to use the things like Google and other search engines and other sources to decide what's relevant and not relevant, which is actually one of the most important skills I think that need to be taught, because there's so much massive amounts of information, and kids need to learn how to go through that and to use different sources of information, not just Wikipedia and Google, but how to data mine and realize what's relevant. So if you have someone guiding them all those kinds of skills, then you will really prepare them for life and for the workplace, how to write and work. I mean, I went to an alternative school, an alternative college. I did very well for the first few years. It was a regular school, but I really hated it. It was boring, it was miserable, and I didn't study things I like to study. So I chose to change my path, and that's what made me, in many ways, gave me all the tools that I need for today, for everything I've done along the way. I learned how to research, I learned how to write, and my writing was critiqued and given back 100 times until it was the way it should have been. Those are the skills, and that was a fantastic education. And then I put my kids in regular school, because there aren't schools like that. I live in Israel, there isn't, and it makes me sad because my education was fantastic, and I wish that PBL or alternative schools or that sort of thing were available widely, because it actually prepares people for life.
And a question I wanted to ask you, going into something maybe a little bit more concrete, because I imagine, as you said now, not everybody has the chance to be able to put their children into some of these alternative education or places that maybe
Not
are
available.
indeed not available. What is it that they can do, or I could do as a parent or as a close one, a family, a relative, to support that process of them growing and learning outside of the school? What are some of these concrete things that I could do?
After school activities, you can do community projects. You can organize a group of kids to do things together to benefit the community, or how you can do it at home in a home level, but you can also do it at a community level, and take different kinds of kids and guide them. So each one is doing something, giving what they can and mentoring in different ways. But and kids, if you say to them, okay, what do you think your neighborhood needs? What do you think your school needs? What do you think we could do at home? And then help them figure out how to do those things together, and do that research. That would be great. Temple Grandin, she's a very famous autistic woman, and she said that she grew up many years ago. And she said when she was young, there wasn't all the TV and everything. Kids would go out and play and together in the neighborhood. And I think, if I remember correctly, she would build planes or models or things like that. She was very good, and she gained standing and acceptance because she was very good at that. And the kids, whereas maybe she was socially awkward, but she had these talents, so it helped her to become accepted because the kids would realize she had something to contribute. So parents can create those situations, or community members. and I think it's very important also to have a group of all different kinds of people and cross those lines, whether
Yeah.
it be, neurodiversity, whether it be race, age. That also, there's no reason the kids at the same age have to actually work together.
Mm-hmm.
Kids can teach each other.
Yep.
And young kids can teach older kids, and older kids can teach young kids. Everybody's got something to benefit. So the more we mix, and grandma and grandpa would be great to have them involved because they have patience and they have experience and they have knowledge. So like elderly people are fantastic to get involved with projects
Mm-hmm.
to work toward the community. There's so much that can be done. It's just a matter of creativity and guiding it, and making sure that everybody is understood and then generate awareness, and with the skills that are necessary in the back.
And I love one of the things you said. I think I find it fascinating because in the work I'm doing as a coach, obviously I tend to be putting on my coach hat with adults mostly, maybe older children, maybe like youngsters and teenagers and so on. But we tend to forget actually very often, as you said, that these young children have already a lot of the answers. Maybe if they haven't got necessarily the whole process figured out, maybe, but as you said, they probably know what the community needs or what they could do and so on. And what it made me think about is actually we should probably put on that coach hat with our children more often.
Oh yeah.
Rather than telling them what to do.
Yeah.
Being that really true inquirer of, okay, what is it that we can do? What do you think? How do you think we can do it? And then, of course, as you said, they will not necessarily always have the answers, and we need to give them a bit of guidance once in a while. But I imagine that most of the time they have a lot of these answers, especially in the diverse group that we bring together. And for me, I think that's a very key moment in what you were saying. That I probably knew it, but I think it was a good reminder that I probably need to do it more often.
Yeah, it's. I think we all do, right? But I mean, if you say to the kids, and they come up with, sometimes they come up with these wild ideas, and the adult will say, no, that's impossible. Wait a minute, is it really impossible? Okay, let's have the child decide if it's impossible.
Yep.
Let's teach the child how to ask the questions, if it's going to work or not, and why. So let's do the research. Let's try and figure out why it's feasible, not feasible. Who do you need to help you? How? Let's research it together. Like give them the skills. But a lot of times, what we think is impossible, well, maybe it is possible. It's just we're closed-minded, So it's the fantastic opportunity to teach skills, and actually literacy, mathematics, like all these things that, why does someone have to teach mathematics by sitting and doing all these problems like 100 times? You want to build something? Okay, well, you need to learn geometry to figure out if these things are going to fit together, or like this. There's so many ways to teach something. Cooking, like you can do all these cool things to teach the skills. Oh, you want to learn how to cook? Okay, you have to read the recipe. So, like you can teach reading or math or any of those things just by doing stuff at home.
Yeah, you need to understand how the ingredients are working together as well. So if we do a bit of physics or chemistry in there.
Yeah, the things that they're interested in.
Yep.
And if the child is interested in something, they're going to be motivated to learn it. Now, that's another thing about autism. A lot of times, the behaviorist or whoever the person doing the educational program is going to decide these things are like obsessions and all this other stuff. But actually, the thing that the child is interested in is actually the motivator. So instead of not getting into it, you can delve into it, connect with the child from that particular area of interest, and then draw them to widen that interest to other things. If the kid is interested only in, let's say, maps, right? So, but you can teach the child to read through maps. You can teach the child how to go places through maps. You can teach the kids different cultures, what's going on in that city that you've driven to. You can teach them literature, the poems that are, there's no end. So you can start in something that's very limited and then expand it out to the things that you want the child to learn. When my son was very young, he had this incredible therapist, and he was totally nonverbal, and basically he liked to spill water. Right? That was one of his favorite things to do. So this therapist, I've never seen such a wonderful therapist. She was incredible. But they basically poured water for months on end. Okay, they would sit in therapy and pour water, but during that time she poured water. So she had different color soaps. She would pour it from different heights. She would splash it. She would teach you different concepts. She would different shapes of things. She had all the different concepts you can imagine by sitting and pouring water. Like interacting, turn taking, playing, high, low. But the basic. He was young. He was very young, right? He was 3 years old. But the basic elementary concepts, colors, shapes, the whole business. From the point that was interesting to him, which was pouring water instead of saying water. So, there's no end to it, basically. Incredible things you can do with just a little creativity. I don't know how
we can do it with anyone. We can do it with children. We can do it with adults.
Sure.
And we just need to be a little bit more creative, I think, sometimes in
to do with ourselves,
thinking about these things. I think it is about, I think, something you mentioned earlier on, which is about overcoming our own limitations that come from our experiences, our background, whatever it is that we have, our beliefs, and overcoming that so we can see all the creative ways we can actually discover and grow and develop around one topic.
We've usually been taught that there's a right way and a wrong way to do something. And a lot of times, like kids particularly, they want to do something differently. And I think teaching them, like giving them the opportunity to learn, is this efficient to do it this way? Try it. Mess up. Make mistakes, please. I think one of the worst things that kids are taught is to stop making mistakes. Raise your hand really fast, in class, because you want to get 100. Excellence. Excellence is don't make any mistakes in the school system. You want that 100. But actually, if you don't make mistakes, you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to discover anything great. You're going to be afraid to try new things. You don't want to make, I always tell my kids, make mistakes. That's fine. Try and learn from it and not make the same mistake again, right? But a lot of times, there's not a right way and a wrong way to do something. It's not a mistake. Maybe it's less efficient sometimes to do things. You can learn as the kid does it and get more experience. Maybe that's not a great idea because it wasn't efficient. To do this thing in the kitchen this way. It's not efficient. Or they start doing it and you realize that what you've done is not efficient. So, I mean, it's just a matter of having an open mind about it.
And sometimes you probably actually discover new things from making those mistakes as well. I'm sure there are many examples in this world of mistakes that were done and then realizing, actually, I just created something new, invented something. So
it's so frustrating. I have so many conversations with my kids about that they don't want to make mistakes. They want to get it, they don't want to make a mistake on the test. And they don't want to make a mistake on this and that. And I celebrate mistakes. Right? You don't want to make a mistake and screw up your whole life or, whatever. But then you don't want to repeat it. But certainly with learning, most of the time there isn't one right and wrong answer. When the kids come, when one of my kids comes home and they show me an exam and they got an X on it, and I look at the question, I said, well, I would answer it differently too. Maybe it's a bad question. So, like so many things also that we are taught that are mistakes, that are not necessarily mistakes. It's not what the other person expected you to do or wanted you to do, but it's not necessarily a mistake. And I think most people with any kind of neurodiversity tend to have different viewpoints or creative ways of thinking or associated ways of thinking, and have more than one answer or something that, you know, is different angle on things. And those things are useful in the workplace, and certainly in a vastly, you know, rapidly developing high-techy world. The more the merrier, right?
Definitely.
But really that flexibility and willingness to try is sort of taught out of them in school, and it really needs to be the first thing that's taught in school.
Thank you for sharing these. I'm being conscious of time as well, and the time we have together, and there is a question I wanted to ask you because you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning.
Okay.
And it has to do with your own journey here. And I think it relates very much to a topic that is important to me, which is resilience. And one of the elements of resilience, obviously, is that element of spirituality as well. And you mentioned about faith being part of your book and part of your journey. So how did that come across as in that journey of yours?
In which sense?
I don't know.
You know,
how is it? How do you approach it in your book, and how did it become an important part of you?
One has to do with believing. I had two different journeys. Okay, there was one journey which was discovering actually faith and religion, because I did not grow up in a religious setting, religious household, and the other has to do with resilience, as you said, faith, and that helped me on my journey. So to give a little bit of an answer, you know, each level. For me, I think I'm Jewish, and Judaism is not very. It's a very small minority, actually, a fraction of the people in the world are Jewish. So, you know, at some point, you know, as I was growing up, we always said, "Oh, yes, we're proud to be Jews," but I didn't really know what that meant because I didn't even know how the basics. You know, I knew some of the holidays were celebrated, but not in a spiritual sense. It was more a cultural thing. Cultural Judaism is very common. But at some point, I sort of said to myself, okay, if I've been born into this people and there's a very small percentage of the world, then what does that mean? So I sort of got curious, and I decided to go to Israel after I finished college. And the first time I go to Jerusalem, I'm standing in front of these beautiful walls at night. It was cold and it was gorgeous. And I stepped out the car and looked at these walls to the old city. And I said, "Oh, I'm home." And it came out my mouth, and my ears heard it. And I went, "Oh, that's kind of interesting. Why did I say that? You know, what came out of my mouth? What does it mean I'm home? I'm American. I'm not Israeli. And why would I say I'm home? Why would I feel I'm home?" So I kind of brushed it under the rug and sort of ignored it. And went back to New York, and it just kept bothering me. I just kept feeling like I need to go back. I need to go home. I need to go home. There's no reason behind it. After about 7 months, I decided, okay, and I bought a one-way ticket back to Israel. And that was my inner soul, my inner voice. That's that spark of spirituality that I was just beginning to discover that I didn't have a name for. It was many years before I actually began to understand what that meant. There's something called ashgacha, which means that God oversees everything in life. And all these different things kept happening to me that kept leading me to believe that nothing was coincidence. Whether it be wanting to be a vet and suddenly switching gears for no reason that was logical in any way, shape, or form. And then having a son diagnosed with autism, and I had all the skills I needed to raise him. That was one of the things. And there were so many of them that at some point I just said to myself, "No, okay, somebody's managing this. It's definitely much larger than me. We call this thing God, and it's incredible force looking over everything and taking care." And so that's when I decided to begin to learn about spirituality and Jewish law and started living a religious lifestyle. And that's given me tremendous peace of mind, which I didn't have before. I used to always be feeling uncomfortable and not knowing why. But suddenly
Yep.
everything settled down. And then in the face of my surgery, and I sort of, first of all, one of the biggest parts of Judaism is mitzvah. Mitzvah means doing a good deed, okay, whether it be between people or between God, a person and God, or a person with each other. But you're doing good deeds. That's the easiest way to define it. And basically, sort of the meaning of life, what gives you the strength to fight in a lot of ways is as long as I can always do one more good deed, one more mitzvah, then I've got a reason to get out that bed in the morning, right?
Yep.
So if it's going to take me a half hour to walk 4 steps from the couch to the bathroom, which is really hard, I'm not sure if I'm going to fly into the wall or not, on the way. I need to have a good reason to fight that fight.
Yep.
And knowing that there was that one reason, which was there's always something I can do. There's one more thing I can do that's worth in the world. That really gave me a lot of strength. And in addition to that, the learning process, nothing happens randomly. So there gave me a reason to sort of figure out the purpose in life. Why did all this happen to me? Why am I, being this superwoman running around and running educational programs and raising my kids and everything? I was like morning till midnight running. Suddenly I'm stuck on a couch, can't move, and in terrible pain and trying to figure out, I couldn't see straight, literally. The floor would, rise up and stuff like that. It was crazy stuff. And slowly over time, trying to figure out why all this stuff happened to me. It's not random. There must be a reason. That took me a good long time, overcoming a lot of hurdles, but realizing that I'm supposed to take all these experiences, what happened with my children, the whole circles of life. Now it's my understanding, all the understanding I've gained by becoming neurodivergent myself, and write them and share them with the world in order to help other people understand their children. So I have a purpose in it. And all that stems from faith. And that gives me energy to keep doing what I'm doing. And so the whole thing is very nicely tied up in that, and gives a great peace.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing this. And I think we tend to forget. And I think for me, I think I shared it last time we spoke as well. I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I think, again, it's about finding that spirituality that works for each and every one of you and us, each and every one of us. And everybody finds it in some ways, but it always goes back, as you said, to that purpose in life, whether it's aligned with a God or something else. It is about finding that, as we would say in French, that raison d'être, that purpose of why are we here and what is it that we can do that will push us forward and say, yeah, I will continue, I will bounce back from the challenges that come. And I love your story. I love how it came into your life and how it fits so beautifully in the bigger picture. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Pleasure.
One last question I wanted to ask you is, before we close on this episode, which has been really, really insightful, is if you were to leave our listeners with one thing, what would that be?
That's a hard one. Always have hope. Always have hope. Things with hard work and with faith, whatever the faith may be, as you nicely put it, things can always change and you can always achieve things and you can always do better. Whether it be if you're a parent of a child with this severe disability, things can always improve, whether you have a goal, whether you have a challenge. There's hope and faith and hard work. you can always move forward. And that's basically, that's the name of my book is Moving Forward, because that's really what I would like people to take away is to keep moving, keep moving. I mean, this world is nuts right now. In a lot of ways, not positive. There's a lot of really scary things and a test of faith in many, many ways. Just have to just keep moving, keep moving forward, doing everyone can do their best, and that's what I would like to, and not beat ourselves up about it. That's one day we can do a lot of things, and another day, it's kind of hard to move out of the bed and drive yourself to the fridge to have a couple of cubes of chocolate, which definitely help make the day a little brighter. But but really, keep moving and don't believe anyone who tries to take away hope, because there are a lot of people out there, so you should be realistic about it. Hope, faith, keep moving, working, and the world can be a better place.
Thank you. I think that's a beautiful way to close this episode, and thank you for these words of wisdom. And I'm glad you looked back to your book and the name of your book as well. So for everyone listening, I will put all the details, how they can reach out to you if they have more questions and they want to connect, but as well the link to your book so they can access it as well. I'll put everything in the notes. Jacki, thank you so much for being part of this journey, being part of, or allowing us to be part of your journey as well as being part of this podcast. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Looking forward to meeting again.
Me too. I look forward to that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at As Diverse as Two Peas in a Pod. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.